Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. An old rivalry took centre stage in the Premier League as Jose Mourinho hosted his old nemesis when Spurs took on Manchester City. Spurs wanted the win to maintain their standing near the top of the table, while City needed it to kickstart their season. In the end, the match ended 2-0 to Spurs thanks to goals by Son and Lo Celso. The XG indicated that overall, City created the better opportunities. But as the XG time map suggested, City accumulated many low-quality chances, whereas Spurs had few high-quality chances. But what tactics did both managers use? Let's take a look. A special shout out to everyone who's been able to support Football Made Simple on Patreon so far. If you want to help the channel, I'd love it if you considered supporting on patreon.com/footballmadesimple, and you'll get perks like early access to videos, exclusive content, and so much more. A quick reminder of the formations used by both sides, as seen on the OneFootball app. OneFootball will get you match updates, formation updates, as well as player and team stats, and so much more. And the best part is, you can get it absolutely free through the sponsored link in the description below. Let's start with what City did with their 66% possession, before moving on to how Mourinho exposed City's flaws. When Ederson had the ball deep, City were able to play out under little pressure, mainly because Spurs went ahead early and were happy to sit deep thereafter. They would instead initially sit deeper in a mid-block as City moved up the pitch. From here, Ndombele would push up alongside Kane to create a front two to pressure the centre-backs. As a result, rather than immediately invert into the midfield as usual, Walker was very much the third centre-back in the build-up, to give them the numerical superiority here. So, instead, Cancelo tended to push up into midfield alongside Rodri, as you can see in the average positions. This would allow De Bruyne and Bernardo freedom as there was a double pivot covering behind them. We often saw Bernardo push high into the half space, whilst De Bruyne would do the same on the right to create a front five to use all 5 vertical zones of the pitch. Mourinho adapted to this quickly. He dropped the 2 forwards deeper so that instead of pressuring the centre-backs, they used their cover shadows to stop the supply into the pivots. And the role of the wingers was crucial. Bergwijn in particular on the left would move extremely narrow to cover the pass into De Bruyne when he dropped deeper in the half space. When possible, Højbjerg would also move out to double up. Son would perform a similar role on the right, but as Bernardo tended to push much higher, we could see Sissoko drop into the backline completely to ensure that the half space was covered. But generally, the shape meant that Spurs were willing to give up the wide regions, and this was because City only had one man wide on either flank, so overloads were difficult to achieve. But we still did see City look to switch the ball to either wing, where the winger would then look for the attacking midfielder who was making runs into the half space, although they were often well covered. We see this in the stats as Rodri and Cancelo, effectively the pivots, looking to switch to opposite sides, played the most long balls for their team. But for the most part, Spurs' midfield congestion meant that City struggled to create clear opportunities. And City faced major problems because of their double pivot. In central regions, Cancelo tended to take risks even when under pressure, making him a press target, and often he lost the ball. Rodri was safe on the ball, but a liability off of it. He tended to drift high up the pitch to create angles for his teammates to find, or to counter-press when the ball was lost. But as the sole defensive midfielder on paper, this left a gaping hole in the midfield, and he was constantly caught the wrong side of the ball. This was a space that Kane loved to drop into to create. Son's incisive runs higher up meant that City's centre-backs couldn't move high to compress the space. I've previously assessed this tactical problem that City have in a previous video looking at Pep's failed tactics from 1920, so you can check that out after this video. This pattern is how the Lo Celso goal comes about. City lose the ball high up and Rodri had been high to receive the ball, and he then moves to counter-press. Kane is therefore in acres of space between the lines and receives, as Son and Bergwijn have forced the defense deeper. Kane then drives into the space unchallenged and finds Lo Celso, and Edison tries to close down the angle to no avail. Now, what did Spurs do on the ball? When necessary, they could go long immediately, with Lloris attempting 19 long balls compared to Edison's 2. But when playing out, they would drop both centre-backs into the box, with the full-backs pushing higher and wider. City pressed much higher, with a lower passes per defensive action of just 6.5. One of the wingers would often push up alongside Jesus to pressure the backline, but this often meant that the Spurs full-backs were easy outlets. As a result, they had the most touches for Spurs. Soon, City's midfielders began to position themselves wider in anticipation of this, which would leave a gaping hole in midfield. We often saw Ndombele drop deeper, and Rodri would take the bait and follow, which would then allow Kane to drop between the lines. In the same phase, Son was moving central, pushing the defense deep, and providing verticality, which Kane would then look to find. And even in open play, City pressed with a high line, so a direct long ball looking for the runs of Son coming central led to some interesting situations. Son's goal was a perfect example of his connection with Kane. Son had come central, as usual, and Kane initiates the opposing movements, dropping deep and drawing Laporte, which makes space for Son to run in behind. Overall, despite having the higher expected goals, Spurs primarily limited City to low-quality chances. Mourinho's counter-attacking tactics worked perfectly, and City desperately need to get back to the drawing board. But what did you make of the match? What other tactics did you notice? Drop them down below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like would be great. And a special thanks to all my current Patreons, including Philip Sam, Ivan, and Andre Tanasi, who have recently joined my Ultra tier. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.